Just delighted to introduce our reader tonight. Vern was born in McCall, Idaho in 1934. He received a BA from Reed College and an MFA from the prestigious Iowa Writers Workshop at the University of Iowa. He taught in numerous colleges and came to Lewis and Clark in 1961, where he taught for over 40 years before retiring in 2004. During his 42-year tenure there, he published literally hundreds of poems nationally and a wide array of prose offerings. He's the author of 12 collections of poetry, including The Window, 1964, Laments, 1975, The Journey Begins, 1976, and Little Known Sports, 1994. He's won numerous awards and honors, including 2 National Endowment for the Arts Fellowships, a Guggenheim Fellowship in 1982, an Oregon Book Award for selected poems in 1990. He also received in 1990 the only Master's Fellowship ever awarded to a writer by the Oregon Arts Commission. He's a recipient of numerous other awards and was also a finalist for the 2005 National Book Award in Poetry for The Moments Equation. Though he's retired from teaching, he remains active in fiction and poetry. In addition to that, as many of you may know this, I did confirm that Vern is a graduate of Milwaukie High School. So, would you join me in welcoming a returning graduate and our reader tonight, Vern Rustala.
Yeah, it's old home week. I've seen a number of former classmates here. It's great to see people. See that they're still around. What I'd like to do is, since I haven't read in Milwaukie before, I'd like to read some of the earlier poems as well as some more recent ones. In fact, the first poem I want to read is from my first book, a book called The Window. Now, this is not an autobiographical poem, though it is called The Fat Man. I call everyone shriveled, dried apples fit for cellars, nothing more. They have no folds, no flesh to touch, gangling reminders of the grave. Existence melts in my mouth. I relish. I taste the sweet jams of life. I gorge and worship the place of love, all kitchens everywhere. Diet is sin, an effort to turn limbs to razors that slice a lover's hands. Right angles pierce my eye. I love the arc, soft ovals, the curve, things molded to be touched, the soothers of sight. I feel at least 10 souls swimming in my flesh. I feed them with both hands. Someday, I will become a mountain. I eat the world. I had a teacher and a good poet and friend, Donald Justice, who, after that poem came out, wrote a poem called The Thin Man. He was a very thin man as a young man. As time went on, he got a little bulkier. Sad to say he's no longer with us. The next one is called Words. And the idea, of course, is that, as the poem, I think, pretty much explains itself. But if you're poor, you have a vocabulary that's richer than your life. You have the names of things that you don't see or have. And that's what the poem is about. Not to say that that my family was poor, but we were working class, and they'd gone through the Depression, and were afflicted by that, as most of our parents were, expecting the next one to come, which I guess is coming about now, isn't it? Words. We had more than we could use. They embarrassed us, our talk fuller than our rooms. They named nothing we could touch. Dining room, study, mantelpiece, lobster thermidor. They named things you only saw in movies, the thin flicker Friday nights that made us feel empty in the cold as we walked home through our only great abundance, snow. This is why we said ain't and he don't. We wanted words to fit our cold linoleum, our oil lamps, our outhouse. We knew better, but it was wrong to use a language that named ghosts nothing you could touch. We left such words at school, locked in books where they belonged. It was the vocabulary of our lives that was so thin. We knew this and grew to hate all the words that named the vacancy of our rooms. Looking here, we said studio couch and saw cot. Looking there, we said Venetian blinds and saw only the yard. Brick meant tar paper. Fireplace meant wood stove. And this is why we came to love the double negative. A very fine fellow named Lars Nordstrom, who was from Sweden and lives in this country now, translated some of my poems once, and he wanted to translate this one, but he said the last part it would mean nothing in Swedish because they don't have the concept of the double negative in their language. And you can think back maybe to your old high school English classes, talking about the double negative. This is a poem called The New Stove. And as with most of my poems, I think it's not difficult. I hope it's not difficult to follow. It tells a story of a sort. And I'll just maybe let it reveal its story. I will mention one thing that in the poem I say that I'm 46 at the time of the poem. Well, I was at the time of that poem. I'm only 39 now, of course.
We had a question, Vern, too, about closer to the mic.
Well, why don't you move the mic closer to me? I know, all these old birds here, they can't hear very well. Okay. Tiger, tiger, burning bright. Can you hear back there now? Can you hear? Apparently not. Okay. I hate microphones. Good. The new stove. The old one, ungainly, out of place, sits by the back door, sides streaked with old meals, buttons carrying old fingerprints away. Tomorrow to Union Gospel. This was my mother's stove, our companion for 14 years, collaborator on how many meals? Burners black and still, oven going cold in the weather, dead clock deader still. Once it was her new stove, hers for a year before her death at 45. Clearly not good enough to keep her alive, but good enough to carry me this far to 46, in this kitchen where I sit, dreaming back and forth, consulting that dead clock and those dark burners with no news of food. Only memories going back to a day in winter when the stove, unnoticed, became ours. I remember the last drive to the hospital, my father driving, my arm over the seat to hold her hand, holding as if pulling her along, holding as if keeping her from falling some great distance, towing her dry hand all the way. I remember how my arm went numb, how I wanted it to sleep and hurt, to somehow pay and buy her back with stupid pain. There was her dry hand and her eyes, and that drive going on and on, yet too short. And there was that truck of junk leading us, old refrigerators, old stoves, battered and rusty, which I tried to stare away, but it continued, bearing the trite symbols of the obsolete, our culture's silly signs of death. And all the while, her new stove waited at home, shiny, guaranteed for years and years to come. Yeah, that was she died the first year after we returned to Portland. That year I started teaching at Lewis and Clark. So change of tone here. I'm sure you've noticed as you drive along highways that you'll see a single shoe beside the road, right? Right? Okay, well, I'd seen that for years and years. And finally, I decided, well, I'm going to write something about that. So I wrote a poem called The Mystery of Lost Shoes. This morning, there was another one, looking used but not worn out, beside the road. What do they mean? Do people just abandon them at 60 on the freeway, suddenly tired of a single shoe? Are they some secret sign? Are they just the shoes of careless drivers dangling one foot out the window? Do they belong to insomniac passengers who can only sleep with their feet in the open air, one shoe falling off in a dream? What do they mean? What are they trying to say? And this afternoon, that pairs are unnatural, of high heels 30 feet apart. But one was red, the other brown. Imagine what you want. Are they all that's left of walkers, single vacant tokens? Are they obscure milestones, hex signs? But how are they lost? What carelessness prevails allows single shoes to fall from sealed cars? Do they contain desperate messages like bottles? Was each filled with wine and passion and thrown away to seal deep intimacies? Are they placed there by itinerant princes looking for the right fit? What do they mean? They come in all sizes. Their tongues loll. They look helpless. What do they mean? So desolate, so empty, so hungry without their feet. And some years ago, I had occasion to spend some time. Joan worked for a while at the Lloyd Center, and they have that skating rink there. So I would come over and pick her up and spend time watching the skaters. And as with the lost shoes, then it dawned on me, well, maybe there's a poem there. So this is Skaters. And there's reference to Bruegel, the great Dutch painter, who painted very busy paintings, lots of people running around. There are many tonight, and the rink is like a Bruegel. Such motion and animation. At first glance, some busy microcosm. Above the rink, I lean on a rail, my sleeve settling in the residue of a sticky drink. And on the rail beside it, scratched, Letitia loves Spud. Below, the skaters circle crazily, looking now like a swarm, but you soon begin to see that two types stand out. The helpless scarecrows, so tenuous and bad, they command the attention they fear. You can almost hear them pray for balance. The others, you notice, of course, circle with such skill they seem to fly. They skate with their hands behind their backs and show enormous deference by giving the inept berths wide enough for ships. In truth, they're in their element, a kind of royalty down there, but so good that they're benign. Like royalty, they know they need the awkward to set them off. One cuts an elaborate figure of concern for a fallen child, showing he's not only good on skates, but good at heart. Another averts what we're meant to believe is a disaster with arms thrown up and a nifty shift when a scarecrow falls 20 feet away. Thinking of Letitia and Spud, who were moved to pledge their love right here, I realized the Bruegel swirl below just may be a little version of the world, though all the gestures seem too large, like a silent movie. Mimed danger and concern, pratfalls, the rubber-kneed drunks, bad music in the background, and love pledged in the balcony. So in the past years, since I retired, I've published 3 books, which maybe is a record, I don't know. It's a record for me, anyway. And one of them is called A Handbook for Writers, New and Selected Prose Poems. I've written a couple books of prose poems, and I won't talk about what it is. Everybody wants to know, what's a prose? Well, a prose poem is a poem written in prose. Let's leave it at that. And I'll read a couple of these. In one of the books, there's a section called Bestiary, in which I look at ordinary, everyday things and sort of view them as if they're animate in some way. And this is called Salt and Pepper. Monogamous as wolves, they move through their lives together, rarely separated. To honor their feeling for fidelity, we have developed the habit of asking for them together, knowing that they keenly feel any separation, however brief. Though salt is our favorite, a relative really, we never indicate this in order to spare Pepper's volatile but delicate feelings. And that also, there's also a section, and it's the title section of that book. It's called Little Known Sports. I mean, we all know about the regular sports. In fact, I see Ron Paulson down there. He and I played football together at Milwaukie High School. But there are other sports you don't know about. This is one called sleeping. Though winners are rarely declared, this is an arduous contest, similar, some feel, to boxing. This fact can be readily corroborated by simply looking at people who have just awakened. Look at their red and puffy eyes, the disheveled hair, the slow, sore movements, and their generally dazed appearance. Occasionally as well, there are those deep scars running across their cheeks. Clearly, if appearances don't lie, they've been engaged in some damaging and dangerous activity, and furthermore have come out the losers. If it's not dangerous, and you still have doubts, why do we hear so often the phrase, "He died in his sleep"? And from another fairly recent book called The Moment's Equation. That's the one that was the finalist for the National Book Award, which was quite nice. And I'll read a few of these. There is a broadside, I think, of this poem, The Windowsill Over the Sink, a short poem. I sent it to Tom because of its length. I mean, I like the poem, but he wanted a short poem. My poems tend to kind of run on a bit. But The Windowsill Over the Sink. You're back from a long trip and promise yourself that it will never be cluttered again. Yet you see it grow its inhabitants almost by stealth. A horse chestnut, votive candles, paper clips, and safety pins. The accumulation gathering around the aspirin bottle. Then the cup with the broken handle, the bird's nest found on a walk, pine cones, matchbooks, coupons offering 10 cents off on a Mercedes. The old life is re-entered this way, and begins to crowd around you, with its clutter showing again that you can keep everything but promises. Haven't we had that experience? And this is called Cards from My Aunt. And it's, part of it's based on cards we used to receive from an aunt who is, alas, no longer with us. But every Christmas we would look forward to getting her cards because she would say things that we couldn't figure out. Maybe you've all had an aunt like that, or an uncle. Oh, and there's also people who were in my class at Milwaukie will remember from grade school probably the Palmer method, but those of you who are younger won't remember that perhaps. But it was a handwriting method that we were taught in grade school, where you make circles, I don't know. And you're supposed to hold the pencil so lightly that the teacher can pluck it out of your hand. If you hung on to it, I don't know, you would get your hand slapped or something. Remember, Dorothy?
I remember. I'll have to add something because when I was doing the Palmer method in about third or fourth grade, the teacher put the record, the Stars and Stripes Forever.
Yeah. Well, that would affect the rhythm, wouldn't it? I'll have to remember that. Okay. Cards from my aunt. They come every year at Christmas, written in a perfect Palmer method. We imagine her still doing the exercises, rows and rows of perfect O's at the kitchen table. They come every year, but tell us too little. We can't even read between the lines. Among the usual greetings, there's always a phrase out of the blue. Haven't moved yet. Or, Sam is much improved. Others have told us the pollen count was too high, and it must have been the full moon. We get this piecemeal version of her life once a year, a story all foreshadowing or denouement, all punchline without any build-up. In what way has Sam improved? Was it pollen or the moon that made him sick? With lines dropped in that way, there is always a sense of crisis, just over or about to happen, but never the thing itself, a kind of off-stage drama we can never fathom. All we can do is crown her the heavyweight champion of exasperation, or queen of the non sequitur. The last card ended with, "You just can't stop people from stealing." Stealing what, Auntie? And how is Sam now? Have you moved yet? What is the pollen count on the moon? And here's one called 15 that takes me back to high school. It's warm up here. Yeah. What's this talk about 90 degrees? I hate 90 degrees.
We can have the door open for more air, but the noise comes in, so.
Oh, no, that's no problem. That's okay. I always sweat. And it's called 15, and the reference is to those secret societies that existed in high school in those days. I don't know why they were called secret, but because everybody knew about them, but they were supposed to be illegal or something. The administrations didn't like them, and they didn't do it. We didn't do anything. You know, we weren't gangs. We weren't even hackers, since there weren't any computers. We were just people who belonged to this thing. But it was a preparation for a certain kind of life that eventually didn't seem right. Oh, but it also, I refer in the poem right off the bat to the song Heart and Soul. Remember how I used to play Heart and Soul on the piano, 2 parts? I don't know, do people still do that? Great. That spring, there was always a piano, or its echo, two people playing the two-part heart and soul. I was pledging a secret society with some Greek name I've forgotten. Me, a kid whose father was a day laborer, got a bid. We met in houses like movie sets, carpets, dark paneling, tiled bathrooms with towels so soft and thick they felt like fur. And there I was among the sons of dentists and insurance agents, sons who drove their own cars, who had drawers full of cashmere sweaters, who wore just the right kind of saddle shoes. Over it all, the sound of heart and soul, a sad beauty I floated on, nearly breathless amid the layers of middle-class richness. They were sure to catch on, I knew, and blackball me to oblivion. But they didn't, and I stuck it out through the silly fright of Hell Week until they shook my hand as a brother. For a while I was a member of that world, swearing secrecy and bigotry, swearing allegiance to a future of car dealerships or podiatry, all to the tune of heart and soul, like music in a Doris Day movie. Takes a kind of grim view of that, doesn't it? I truly don't remember what the name of that was. Anybody remember what it was called? Yeah, they're still afraid that Mr. Dove is going to put them in detention. Mr. Dove was the guy who handled, what do they call it? Punishment, I guess it's called. The standard assistant or the vice principal's job. Remember Mr. Dove was a very elegant gentleman, though, wasn't he? He had a nice sort of Errol Flynn look about him. I mentioned football. Here is a football poem, and it's called August Memories, and it refers to the preseason practices that exist before, or that existed before the regular season started. Every bleached August, I remember the parched dust of preseason, sore knees wincing with wind sprints and laps, grass drills without any grass, the croaking voices of coaches calling us chicken, calling us sissies through those weeks of pure, dizzy August heat, coaches yelling, "Come on, girls, let's see what you got." And we ground on, heaving our guts out after laps and sprints, spitting cotton and bile, mouths drier than the dusty field. Every day the squad got smaller, the coaches humiliating people away with nutcracker drills, crowing when a shrimp went against a goon, calling them quitters, gutless, no balls at all. The rest of us stuck it out through twice-a-days till scrimmaging started and the croaking volume turned up. Whatever it was, we never did it right. Hit the two-hole, stupid. Drive your shoulder all the way through. Don't try to hide out there. We see you. Our little Devil's Island went on, seeming endless, until we arrived at the first pep rally. Beck, he's our man. If he can't do it, Fowler can. If Fowler, he's our man. Which took us to the oasis of the first game. Under the mystery of the lights, in our bright new uniforms, we clattered onto the field while the rally girls cheered, and we became heroes and loved every minute of it. Is that accurate, Ron?
Yes. Very good.
No, I as a kid, I was a jock. I loved sports. I still love sports. And here's a poem. Well, it really is a poem about art, in a way, I guess. It's called Billie Holiday, the great jazz singer. You've all perhaps heard of her. And it's another kind of a narrative in a way. And I think it makes itself fairly clear as it goes along. And there is reference to her last years when well, I'll just read the poem, and it talks about that. On those last records, her voice sounds almost gone, crackling, breaking. But hitting notes wasn't the point. She was after the bones of beauty, not the flesh. It was far too late for anything else. She sang What Must Happen, What Has, the death of gardenias, the abyss that the abyss falls into. It all scraped along her phrases, extracting the horrible meat hiding inside simple words, in the space between each word, between each note. And she broke our hearts until they could break no more, then broke them one more time, just to make sure we got the point. Art isn't on the surface, not some decoration like frosting, like a flower in your hair. It's like a silk bag of pulverized crystal, glinting, sharp, able to cut in any direction. Her voice filled every room in our minds and showed how empty each was, how desolate the wind blowing through them. And yet with sticks and stones, cast-offs, garage sale losers, she furnished each one with a shattered, gritty beauty just before she took it all away. And it makes you think about art. I mean, the best artists aren't necessarily the most skillful artists. There's that extra thing they bring to the art. Who knows what it is? The great Emily Dickinson said, art is a house trying to be haunted. It is trying to get something in there, that some spirit, some force that's in the piece. And I remember reading, somebody wrote about the great painter Hopper, Edward Hopper, said, well, if he were a better painter, he probably wouldn't be as good an artist. Which is a paradoxical statement, but it is true. You know. And Billie Holiday, even though her voice was not gone totally, but was not what it had been, was still a great artist because of the feeling she got into it, the sense of life that was there, all those things. That was just a little mid-reading sermon. And this is from a book called How We Spent Our Time, the most recent one. I was looking for that. And all of the poems have an ing in the title. Looking for work, getting and spending, letting things slide, dreaming of journeys, going to England. Some say gerunds, some say participles, but how we spent our time. We spent our time looking for work, doing this, doing that. And the first one, in fact, I'm going to read is looking for work. And it goes back to college days, back to the time when you could get a summer job and make a fair amount of what it cost you to go to college. And as I've been saying recently, now the only summer job you could get to finance college tuition would be robbing banks, which I don't advise, because you might not get sent to college, or you'd get sent to the College of Hard Knocks. But, I mean, the increase in tuitions is just crazy over the years. I mean, it's almost as bad as the price of gas. Okay, looking for work. Oh, wait a minute. There's a reference to a novel called Lie Down in Darkness, which is the first novel by the writer William Styron, who's the guy who wrote Sophie's Choice and others. And there's a reference to Charles Dickens, and I'll maybe mention something about that after. Today the line at the soup kitchen was longer than last week. Winter is coming. And I remember that summer years ago, I spent mornings on a bench at 3rd and Salmon, reading the way a hungry man eats, caught in the gap between two fears, not finding a job and finding one. The fears made the words glow with some extra meaning. I was reading Lie Down in Darkness, and I sank lower each day into darkness, the summer slipping away with each click of the checkers the players near me moved with such care. But I couldn't move, as if fastened there, reading the same sentence over and over, lost in a kind of waking coma. I remember the dusty taste of those mornings among the old men sunning their drunk tank stubble, and how I couldn't walk the block and a half to the employment office. I knew nothing waited there but the clerk's dry lips saying sorry, or worse, offering something terrible, some blacking factory where I would disappear forever, eaten alive by America's fierce indifference. And I was helpless, holding the book like a life preserver, knowing I was wholly useless, with hands unable to do anything worth a single measly dime to anyone, anywhere. My poems don't have happy endings usually, but that event, that summer had a happy ending. I got a job and continued with school. So. I got a job at Libby's Cannery. Remember that? Over by Cleveland High School. First year it was a great job. It just declined steadily. This is one for the homeowners. It's called Letting Things Slide. And you will understand, and maybe it's a warning to those who don't own their own homes yet. No, I recommend it, but it can be a pain in the ass too, right? Those stand-ins for the usual turmoil inside our lives turn up without invitation, taunting us. That leaking pipe, those cracked tiles, each a comment on our deep incompetence. The furnace smoking or coughing to a halt, a rain gutter falling off while we sleep, or the toilet simply going on strike without warning. This is the thing about owning they never tell you. It's called keeping track. It's called maintenance. Careful people we hate call it monitoring. And we know we're at fault. The stand-ins make that clear. Stains splash down walls like stigmata, and a crack in plaster draws a cartoon lightning bolt that hits us deep like an arthritic stab, and we're helpless, crawling through the yellow pages for the help we know will be too late. We let things slide, haven't monitored our surroundings in the same way we've let our lives get away from us. Our balanced checkbook approach to history is a mess. And that was another trick. We thought you were just supposed to live your life, not keep track of every minute like some frantic scorekeeper. But we send out our dim SOSs anyway, and the trucks rumble to a stop out front, and the repairmen come in with toolkits full of remedies. But their kits rattle, sounding like they're full of a deeper brokenness, and we're sure we'll get more problem than solution out of them. And it's true. They never really fix what's wrong. Or worse, each repair uncovers something new and bad and costly, broadly hinting at some homeowner's entropy, sucking us down its bankrupt junkyard abyss. And this gets all mixed up with being wrong and fears of secret eyeless creatures gnawing at the foundations, and the luggage we must carry, our special toolkits of despair, toward the final dark appointment when the very last thing goes wrong for good. A few years ago, we were in Eugene, and we wanted to take 99 back up. I'm not fond of freeways and try to avoid them when I can. But as this poem points out, we had a hell of a time finding 99. We were down there again more recently, and had an even more difficult time. But finally in Salem we gave up and went back on the freeway. This is called Taking the Old Road. Yesterday we fell for it again, letting ourselves be herded along I-5. All traffic a single-minded 70, roadsides like blinders, farmland and towns turned into vague rumors. Today we wanted no more of being told there was only one way to go, but had to ask 3 times for the old road. No one seemed to remember. Their directions took us into hills, along roads with aliases and alibis and no true identities. We had their meaning. Anything off the freeway is an illusion. Those roads and towns edited out of memory. But finally an old man, killing time on a corner, understood and sent us free of clover leaves and ramps. The traffic thinned, and we drove into our own past, through towns with real names, Woodburn, Aurora, Canby. Suddenly a local version of the world appeared. People on sidewalks, schools, houses, and our eyes filled as we slowed to a human speed, passing landmarks like the Chuckhold Tavern, antique buffaloes, and Flo's Beauty Salon and Ferry. That's my all-time favorite. We knew again how interstates were meant to drain wit away with their simple numbers. And for us, the map came alive, and main streets bounced into view like those remembered from childhood, dreaming by in evening light, with those mysterious lives of strangers hovering under street lamps, people we would never know. Freeways pound travel to amnesia, the way airports do, duplicates of each other, history carefully washed away, a method for losing the past, those towns, those farms we came from, as if they were guilty secrets. But for miles we were back there, traveling the old 2 lanes in ancient heavy cars, our parents talking quietly in the front seat, as we counted livestock in misty pastures and wondered about the people wool gathering behind those single lighted windows in all the lonely farmhouses. Okay. I think I'll just read one more. This is called Getting Out of the Army. Like many people of my generation, I got drafted. Ron, I think you were in the Air Force, right? Yeah. But most of us served in one way or another. Most of us were pretty lucky though too, because we were in, it was peacetime. It was during the Eisenhower years, which nobody ever thought anybody would look back too nostalgically, but and again, this is a kind of narrative, and there are references to World War II airplanes, military planes. Some of you will remember those names. Some of you will not ever have heard of them, but these are the ones. And this is the story of the last bit of time that I was in the Army. I had a soft touch. I was an editor of a newspaper and didn't have to go out in the field or do any of the stuff that soldiers usually do. The first 6 months were terrible, but the last part was pretty good. And we were also overseas. We were in Munich, and the beer was awfully good. And we got to travel around Europe. But anyway, those last few months I was edgy, having saluted one officer too many. Sure, I would wind up saying the wrong thing and lose my soft touch job and early release, or even worse. They're always tough on short timers. It was then you started buying back my childhood, and I put together model after model of the hero planes I loved in 43 and 4. Mustangs, those slim cigars with their elegant bubble cockpits. Workhorse Hellcats built like stocky guards and catchers. Lovely gull-winged Corsairs, and that era's Toyota, the Zero. I was a factory living through the war again, turning out aircraft, and back in California, scanning the horizon for Mitsubishi bombers as the sway-backed PBYs lumbered out to sea on patrol. My Spitfires and Hurricanes saved Britain from the Blitz one more time, and I traveled nights with the mysterious Black Widows like catamarans, the night fighters of all our dreams. I felt all their controls in my hands and spiraled with vertigo down with the newsreels, fishtailing bombs from flying fortresses and liberators, flew B-25s with Doolittle from carriers to bomb Tokyo in 42. I fought the old war, smelling balsa wood and glue. Those planes, the purest forms of beauty I'd ever seen. Even the Messerschmitts, like blunt-nosed sharks, those graceful Focke-Wulfs, and the nightmare scarecrow Stukas screeching down on Poland. I worked furiously, model after model, flying each one as fast as you could buy them through those last tense months. Managing a Sir when I had to, saluting often enough to stay out of hot water, before I flew free for good, when I threw my cap in the sky over Fort Hamilton, and we watched it, knowing it would fly. Thanks a lot. Thank you. How good of you to come out on a night like this. So Tom talked about a question period. I don't know if you have any questions.
Vern, I'd like to ask you as another Milwaukie High graduate, if you do, who inspired you in your literary work? You were so involved in high school with the Milwaukeean, but to carry it beyond that and to get into the poetry end of it.
Yeah. Well, I started writing poetry in high school.
You did.
Yeah. Probably none of you remember, but I would occasionally contribute a little piece of humorous verse to the Milwaukie newspaper. But I was also writing more serious poetry and fiction and so on at that time. And but I was very interested in a lot of other things too, as you are at that age. But when I got to college, I became more sure of the idea that writing was important to me. And writing poetry was the most important thing for me. So by the time I was a junior, I was pretty well committed to writing. I mean, I write short stories, I write essays and so on, but poetry is the central concern. I had a good teacher at Reed named Ken Hansen who encouraged me. And I already mentioned Donald Justice, who was my teacher at Iowa. But with anybody who pursues any art, it's the internal thing that counts. You have to want to do it, because nobody asks you to do it. Nobody cares whether you do it. And there are plenty of things in the culture that discourage you from doing it. I mean, you learn fairly early on if you're serious about it and you want to be published and so on, that you have to deal with rejection, and all artists have to deal with rejection. If you can handle that, you go on with it, and you hope for the best. And the other rule, of course, for me anyway, was if I wasn't writing, I didn't feel right. That was the thing that helped me keep in balance or keep my life the way I wanted it to be. And I don't write 24 hours a day, but I try to write pretty regularly. And it's a way of being, and it's a way of life. And any of the good things that come, a prize or this or that, those are windfalls. You don't write in order to get those. If they happen, that's great, but you don't seek them out. Well, I mean, you try for them, of course. But if you expect that, I think the great novelist Joyce Carey said, anybody who expects reward and recognition, any artist who expects reward and recognition is a fool. If you expect it, you're just going to make yourself unhappy. But if you consider it a windfall, then that's wonderful. Hey, look what happened. Yeah, I got a prize. We can go out to dinner.
Well, there are a lot of us that are very proud of you and your accomplishments.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you. Yeah, great. Anybody else have a question? Sure.
Your interest in graphic art and drawing,
Yeah.
the drawings that you do, did that start in high school?
No, that started the moment I could pick up a pencil. I was drawing throughout my childhood. When I was a kid, I had a huge callus right there, just from drawing. My father was very good at drawing, and I think I was trying to emulate him. In fact, I've got a poem called "Learning to Draw," where I'm trying to do what he did.
Because you've done the
And I
cover art
still-
for some of your books.
Yes, yeah, in fact, yes, yeah. Yeah, I did the cover drawing for this book, and also a cover sort of design for, oh, here it is. I did this too.
Yeah.
And I offered the publisher to do a cover for this book, but he chose Paul Klee instead. No taste at all. And obviously I still do that. I'm not to the extent that I write, but I'm working on a cover for something new too. Yeah.
It sounds like you would have written or drawn no matter what unfolded for you, but what did your education at Iowa provide for you beyond that practice?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is that you're among people your own age who are as serious as you are. And that was one of the few places that existed in those days. Normally, writers lead pretty lonely lives. But there, you're with people who were really serious. So though it wasn't that competitive, there was an element of competition. Or there was an element of helping each other as well. You didn't necessarily, and the thing, of course, that you learned is you don't have to like somebody to like their work, because some of the people weren't very likable people, but they were doing some good work, so you respect that. I think that's for some young writers, I think, or young artists, I think that's good to be in a kind of a group atmosphere where there's a lot of feedback, where you get together and drink beer and talk about poetry and so forth. There was a wonderful tavern in Iowa City, in fact, called Kenny's, which was notable for the Writers' Workshop people, the drama people, and the black athletes. Because they wouldn't have had any athletic teams if it weren't for the black guys, but that was the late 50s, and Iowa City was a very, very prejudiced place. But we all got along in that tavern.
Who were the other poets there with you at?
I don't know if they're Lawson and Ada,
Yeah.
who's now the poet laureate of Oregon. Michael Harper, who is a very well-known poet. Mort Marcus, I think, not as well known, but really, I think, should be much better known. Steve Berg, who was one of the founders of the American Poetry Review. Lou Turco, who's a fine poet, who's probably better known for his book of his called The Book of Forms, which is about poetic forms, which is the most exhaustive, most inclusive book of its kind ever done. And it's well known. I mean, it's always in print. But a fine poet. I can't think of. Oh, yeah, another fine but little-known poet named Rayburn Miller was there. Really a good poet. Robert Mezzi, who's a
Oh, yeah.
good poet.
He was at Pomona, right?
Yeah, he was at Pomona for years, yeah. Yeah, he was one of Garrett Hongo's teachers at Pomona. So there were, and the other good thing was all the teachers were writers, you know. In fiction, Philip Roth was teaching there when I was there. Vance Burjaley. Who? Hortense Kalischer, great writer. Not as well known as she should be, but I recommend Hortense Kalischer. Go out and get her books. Probably have some in the library. Any of those people, yeah. And that was very important, to have teachers. I mean, that was one good thing with Hansen. Hansen was an active poet. I mean, he was publishing when I was at Reed, and that was good. And of course, while we were there, Don Justice's first book came out. So it was a serious thing. We were told, we knew writing was a serious thing, but we were among other people who felt that it was a serious thing. Whatever the wider culture says about it, well, if you don't have poets, you're not going to have any culture anyway. You know, most of the stuff that's so prominent now will never be remembered. I mean, far more people over time will read Shakespeare than will ever read any blockbuster by King or one of those guys. You know, nothing against them. They provide a service, I suppose. Sometimes their books are made into pretty good movies. That's
Time, that's the other thing.
what? Time. Oh yes, time. Well, you get support. Like I taught freshman English, so that gave money. Joan got a job right away, so we were doing pretty well compared to some. And but the time, you would take 6 hours of workshop a semester, so that's you've got a lot of time, and that's what a writer needs. They just need time. And at that time, the MFA also said that you had to take something in an allied field, either a language or an art. And I took a life drawing class and a great class in printmaking with the great man Mauricio Lazansky, who was one of the foremost printmakers in the country at that time, and who was enormously influential. And that was fun too. But the time, just having the time. I mean, that was one thing about the latter part of the Army. I had a lot of time because we edited the Army newspaper weekly. We would get it finished by Wednesday. We'd go to the printing plant on Wednesday and get it all done. Thursday and Friday were kind of free. I mean, we were ostensibly getting the next issue, but I had a typewriter and I worked on poems at the behest almost of Uncle Sam. Get something out of it. So, anybody else? I think that's, oh, okay. Phyllis?
How do you create a quiet environment to be creative?
I don't worry about quiet or anything, no. In fact, I used to always write with the radio on. I don't do that anymore for some reason. But of course, that's another way of shutting out sound, is have the radio on. But in our house, I've got a lovely study, but I write at the kitchen table. And sometimes when nobody else is around, but I write sometimes when people are around too. I think sometimes you can get so precious about these things that you let that stand in the way of getting some work done. Just you just have to buckle down and do it. Otherwise, it doesn't get done. But what I do need is a stretch of time now. When I was teaching, I always keep a notebook and I write things down, drafts and so on. I would write a draft down one day, a draft another day, but there wasn't the time to follow through on it. So then when a patch of time appeared, a vacation, whatever, I'd go back through the notebook and see if any of them, jumped off the page. Some were died on the page, but some would come out, and I would work on those during the breaks. And that's a great thing about teaching, is you do have free time during the summer usually. I mean, I only taught summer school once, and I got sick, so I realized that was not for me. Okay, well, thanks very much for coming. It's very good of you.